the grand illusion of absolute power in 17th century Europe did not rest upon the edge of a sword or the stone walls of a fortress, but upon a cascading mountain of artificial hair that concealed the fragile reality of a mortal king beneath the towering, meticulously curled waves of the allongé periwig. Lay the deeply guarded secret of a scene's sovereign whose hair began to fail him at the tender age of 17, transforming a personal insecurity into a mandatory multi-million-dollar empire of fashion that forced an entire continent of arist fashion to shave their heads in submissive imitation. Every intricate strand of horsehair and human silk woven into those monumental headpieces was a silent testament to the absolute will of the Sun King, a design that redefined majesty. Through the labour of 48 master wigmakers hidden in the shadowed chambers of Paris. Hello, friend, and welcome back to Sleepy History with Karry. It is so comforting begins to slow down, and the quiet of the night settles in, and the quiet outside night settles. Before we begin our journey into the hidden soft textures of the past, take a deep breath and let the tension leave your shoulders. Tell me your city and what time it is where you are, so we can share in this peaceful moment together across the miles. Then get comfortable, adjust your pillow, pull that blanket a little closer to your chin, and let's drift into tonight's story. If you're a regular listener, don't forget to subscribe for more relaxing history, ensuring our quiet sanctuary remains open to you whenever the day feels too heavy. As we prepare to step back in time, let your ambient rest in the knowledge, curated exclusively for relaxation, sleep assistance, the scope, and educational entertainment. Derived from authentic primary records and antique chronicles, the prose has been softly adapted to foster a soothing, restful atmosphere. We are travelling tonight to the year 1670 inside the sprawling candlelit expanses of the Palace of Versailles in France. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive lavender waters, and the distant cool draught of the autumn wind rustling through the manicured gardens outside. Here in the heart of royal power, the visual landscape is dominated not by gold, but by the soft rhythmic swaying of massive, dark curls that frame the faces of every courtier who walks these marble floors. Every movement is deliberate, every glance is measured, and beneath the heavy weight of the elaborate headpieces, a quiet world of absolute devotion unfolds in the dim, golden glow of the palace corridors. The deep stillness of the royal bedchamber at Versailles is punctuated only by the rhythmic soft crackle of seasoned oak burning in the monumental fireplace, casting long, amber shadows across the heavy damask tapestries that line the walls. Here, away from the watchful eyes of foreign ambassadors and plotting ministers, the young Louis XIV stands before a towering Venetian mirror, staring into the silvered glass with a quiet kind, heavy intensity that belies his absolute authority. The golden glow of 40 beeswax candles illuminates the sharp lines of his face, but his gaze is fixed solely upon the crown of his head, where the once thick, lustrous locks of his youth have begun to thin with an alarming, irreversible swiftness. For a monarch who has chosen the sun as his personal emblem, representing eternal light and the undeniable order of perfection and the undeniable order of the cosmos, the sight of his own bare scalp is not merely a matter of vanity, but a profound political crisis. In the 17th century, a king's physical body is considered the direct mirror of his kingdom, and any sign of physical decay, weakness, or premature aging threatens to shatter the illusion of divine, right and absolute strength that he has worked so tirelessly to construct. The cool night air slips through the heavy wooden shutters, carrying the faint earthy scent of damp stone and fallen leaves from the vast gardens below, yet inside the room, the atmosphere remains thick with the unspoken anxiety of a sovereign confronting his own mortality. With a slow, deliberate movement, the king raises a hand to touch remaining strands of hair, his fingers brushing against the fragile reality that must, at all costs, be hidden from the eyes of the world. Every detail of this private sanctuary speaks of immense wealth and unyielding control, from the intricate silk underfoot to the polished marble underfoot, yet the mirror reflects an undeniable truth that no amount of gold can alter. It is in this very room, enveloped by the soft velvet silence of the midnight hour, that the grand concept of the allongé periwig is born, not out of a desire for frivolous ornament, but as a calculated, defensive shield designed to preserve the flawless image of the Sun King. As the fire burns down to a bed of glowing, ruby embers, the king turns away from the glass, his mind already weaving a strategy that will soon transform his personal misfortune into the ultimate symbol of European aristocracy. The soft, quasi-audible slide of linen sheets against silk mattress covers accompanies the young monarch as he sits upon the edge of his massive four-poster bed. The heavy velvet curtains, dyed a deep royal blue and embroidered with golden fleurs-de-lis, sway gently in the draught that slips under the monumental oak doors of the chamber. Louis raises his fingers once more to the fine silk handkerchief resting on his nightstand, with a slow, deliberate movement to inspect the pale fabric under the candlelight. There, resting against the pristine white linen, are several more strands of dark youthful oracles of his restless scalp during the brief hours of his restless sleep. Each strand represents a tiny silent betrayal of his public persona, an undeniable reminder that even the natural cycles of his own body cannot command the natural cycles of his own body. The room feels immense, filled with the quiet weight of a kingdom that demands absolute perfection from its sovereign, where even the smallest physical flaw could be interpreted as a sign of spiritual or political weakness by watchful courtiers. To a casual observer, the loss of a few strands of hair might seem entirely inconsequential, but within the hyper-regulated world of the 17th century French court, appearance is the ultimate currency of power and influence. The young king understands this truth implicitly, knowing that his image must remain static, unchanging, and grand, resembling the eternal marble statues that line the promenade of his expanding palace gardens. Outside, the night patrol of the Royal Guard moves past the tall windows, the distant rhythmic crunch of iron boots on gravel, providing a grounding, predictable cadence to the silent anxiety unfolding within the room. A soft breeze stirs the embers in the fireplace, sending a faint puff of hickory smoke into the air, blending with the subtle aroma of rosewater and clean wax that permeates the private apartment. As the king folds the handkerchief away into a small, inlaid ebony box, he recognizes that traditional remedies and pomades will no longer suffice to protect the dignity of the crown. It is here, in the quiet interval between midnight and dawn, that the necessity for a radical transformation lies, prompting the first soft call for change. If you are enjoying this peaceful journey into the hidden corners of royal history, please consider leaving a gentle like on this video to help a small sanctuary grow. The concept of the Sun King is anchored in the absolute rejection of any visible human frailty, an ideological framework that leaves no room for the natural, unglamorous realities of aging or physical decline. To the public, Louis XIV is not merely a man who wears a crown, but a living embodiment of the state, an unchanging pillar of light around which the entire solar system of European diplomacy and court life revolves. The masterfully crafted myth requires that every aspect of his presentation be flawless, from the precise tilt of his plumed hat to the graceful stride of his high-heeled shoes across the polished parquetry of the state-rooms. A balding sovereign would challenge this carefully constructed narrative of eternal youth and boundless vigour, exposing the vulnerable mortal beneath the magnificent robes of state. In the quiet hours before the palace wakes, the king contemplates the profound symbolic danger of his condition, with understanding that a visible loss of hair would invite whispered jests from foreign ambassadors and subtle shifts in domestic allegiance. The physical body of the monarch is scrutinized by hundreds of eyes every day during the morning ritual of the lever, where courtiers gather to witness the simple acts of the king, washing his hands and putting on his coat. In this theatrical environment, where every gesture is analysed for political meaning, the crown of the head is as heavily monitored as a strategic border fortress, requiring an equally formidable defence to maintain its integrity. The cool morning mist begins to press against the leaded glass windows, blurring the silhouettes of the distant fountains and creating an isolated floating world inside the royal bedchamber. The soft hiss of a dying candle wick dipping into its own liquid wax breaks the silence, a tiny reminder of the transience of all physicify through artifice, that the king is determined to defy through art by replacing his failing hair with a magnificent stylized creation that exceeds anything nature could provide. He intends to turn a personal vulnerability into an unprecedented statement of architectural grandeur. The decision is not born of a Sustan simple's vanity, but represents a calculated administrative act designed to is untarnished by the common human reality of time. As the first pale light of dawn touches the top of the window frames, the king reaches for his silver bell, ready to summon the trusted advisors who will help him bring this grand, protective illusion to life. The sharp silver chime of the King-S handbell echoes softly through the dressing room, instantly setting in code protocol within the private apartments of the palace. Within minutes, a select group of the king's most trusted personal physicians, including Georges-François Maréchal and Guy Crescent Fagon, alongside senior valets, slip through the hidden tapestry door, their footsteps entirely muffled by the thick Persian carpets covering the floor. The atmosphere in the room is tense but quiet, filled with the shared, unspoken understanding that the matter at mort fait hand is of the highest state importance and must never be discussed outside these walls. Louis sits quietly in a high-backed velvet armchair, his expression calm and unreadable as his chief physicalp examines the thinning areas of his scalp under the direct light of a candelabra. The physician handles the royal head with immense reverence, using a small silver comb to part the remaining strands, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid causing any discomfort to the sovereign. After a long, thoughtful silence, the advisors agree that traditional herbal tonics, expensive oils, and pomades made from animal fats will no longer be sufficient to halt the natural progression of the hair loss. The king's loss of hair is not merely an aesthetic misfortune. It represents an existential threat to the carefully cultivated identity of the Sun King, who has spent years establishing himself as the glorious centre of French civilization. Rumours of illness or physical decay could easily weaponize his political enemies in Spain, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire, who are always looking for a perceived sign of weakness at the heart of the French monarchy. It is during this quiet consultation, as the morning sun begins to burn away the thick mist over the Versailles gardens, that the decision is made to completely bypass nature and turn to the premier artisans of Paris. The king commands that a discreet search be conducted across the capital to identify and recruit the most brilliant, creative and secretive master wigmakers in the kingdom. These craftsmen must not only possess unparalleled technical skill with hair, but they must also understand the heavy burden of royal discretion, ensuring that the king's secret remains completely safe within the walls of their workshops, as the valets begin to prepare the king's public garments for the day. The orders are quietly drafted and stamped with the royal wax seal, ready to be dispatched by trusted couriers into the bustling streets of the city, shifting the burden of royal majesty from nature to artifice. This strategic decision marks the true dawn of a specialized industry, one that will slowly transform the economic landscape of Paris and bind the fortunes of hundreds of artisans directly to the physical image of the crown. The quiet search across the capital culminates in the secret mobilization of 48 of the most exceptional master wigmakers in Paris, individuals chosen as much for their absolute discretion as for their unparalleled artistry with needle and thread. Under the strict supervision of the king's trusted agent, Berruria, these specialized craftsmen are quietly brought to the palace and assigned to secluded workshops hidden in the deep, away, labyrinth service wings of Versailles. The air in these secure rooms is thick with the scent of unwashed wool, natural starches, and the sharp, clean aroma of cedarwood blocks used to hold the custom head shapes. Every craftsman understands that their sole purpose is to construct an impenetrable armor of hair that will completely shield the Sun King from any public perception of physical decline or human vulnerability. Day and night the workshops hum with the delicate, rhythmic snip of iron scissors and the soft scraping of a wooden comb against rough workbenches as the team begins the monumental task of organizing thousands as raw materials. To maintain absolute secrecy, all deliveries of raw hair and materials are routed through the dark kitchen tunnels during the early hours of the morning, long before the first courtiers awake to begin their daily rounds of gossip and political maneuvering. The king knows that if a single rumour regarding his condition escapes into the salons of Paris, it could embolden the remaining factions of the old nobility who still remember the chaotic civil wars of the Fronde during his childhood, when the royal family was forced to flee the capital in the middle of the night. By establishing this permanent guild of royal wigmakers within the palace itself, Louis effectively monopolizes the finest talent in France, preventing rival courts in London or Madrid from replicating his developing style before it is fully realized. The financial investment required for this initial setup is immense, drawing directly from the royal treasury under the careful strategic observation of Jean-Baptiste Colbert. The Bain Webb, the Minister of Finances, who views this project not as mere vanity, but as a potential crown jewel for domestic manufacturing. Every artisan is bound by an oath of silence, working under the dim light of tallow candles to shape the heavy bear the weight of an entire nation aesthetic destiny. Aesthetic destiny. This ambient historical narrative is curated exclusively for relaxation, sleep assistance, and educational entertainment. Derived from authentic primary records and antique chronicles, the prose has been softly adapted to foster a soothing, restful atmosphere. This content was generated with the assistance of specialized artificial intelligence models and subsequently analyzed, refined by the research team at Sleepy History with Karry. Zogady Walkin, all rights reserved. The newly established royal workshops hum with a quiet, intense focus as the 48 master craftsmen begin the delicate process of sorting through the first raw materials gathered from every corner of the kingdom. High upon the wooden shelves of these hidden rooms, sit rows of custom-carved beechwood blocks, each one precisely measured by royal slopes to match the exact contours, slope, and dimensions of the king's head. The floor is covered in a light dusting of fine white rice powder, while the air carries the dry, natural scent of cleaned horsehair and the subtle, sweet aroma of melted beeswax, used to secure the delicate foundation threads to the framing wires. Berrurier moves slowly between the long walnut workbenches, his eyes scanning the progress of his assistants as they use art to separate individual strands of hair by length, texture, and natural shade. Every movement within this room is deliberate and measured, matching the calm, regular rhythm of a grandfather clock ticking away the hours of the afternoon in the distant palace corridors. The sheer scale of this initial organization is unprecedented, requiring an immense amount of concentration to ensure that not a single flawed or brittle strand passes through the rigorous inspection process. Jean-Baptiste Colbert himself takes a personal instructor of these workshops. Centralized for this state-sanctioned hub for this luxury trade, France can soon stop importing expensive hair commodities from Italy and Flanders, keeping royal wealth entirely within the domestic economy. This economic strategy aligns perfectly with the broader mercantilist policies of the French crown, which aim to make the nation completely self-sufficient while forcing foreign rivals to spend their gold on French luxury goods. The craftsmen work in absolute near silence, broken only by the dry whisper of hair sliding through hat aura of inner teeth and the occasional low murmur of an instruction passed from a master to a young apprentice. If you find comfort in this quiet exploration of the past, please take a gentle moment to share this video with a friend who might also enjoy a restful night of history. Seppuku. Beyond the immediate economic benefits, this workshop serves as a highly political laboratory, where the physical presentation of absolute monarchy is engineered with the same precision as a royal fortress. Every loom is strung kep hat fine silk threads from the factories of Lyon, creating a web that must be strong enough to support the towering layers of curls without tearing under strain of daily court ceremonies. The masters understand that any failure in the structural integrity of the king's headpiece would be catastrophic, potentially exposing the monarch to public ridicule during important diplomatic audiences. For this reason, the inspection strands under tension, ensuring that only the most resilient fibers are incorporated into the final design. In Jome, as the afternoon light begins to fade, casting long, dark shadows across the stone floors of the workshop, the assistants carefully cover the sorted bundles in damp linen sheets to maintain their elasticity for the stitching process that will begin at dawn. This meticulous preparation highlights the incredible amount of unseen labour that underpins the magnificent public spectacle of Versailles, where every detail is orchestrated to project an illusion of effortless, eternal majesty. The quiet dedication of these 48 artisans ensures that when the Sun King finally steps into the light of the court, his appearance will be entirely unblemished, solidifying his position as the supreme arbiter of taste, power, and political authority throughout the entire European continent. The true foundation of the multi-million-dollar wig empire rests upon the exhaustive, highly competitive acquisition of premium raw materials, a logistical network that stretches from the poorest rural villages of France to the wealthiest trading ports of the Mediterranean. To create a single long periwig of royal proportions, Berrurier requires an immense quantity of natural human hair that possesses exceptional strength, natural luster, and a texture fine enough to match the king's own youthful locks. Special agents are dispatched quietly into the provinces, frequenting village markets, country fairs, and remote convents where young women are offered modest financial compensation or fine silk ribbons in exchange for their long, untouched tresses. The hair gathered from these northern regions is particularly prized for its soft blonde and chestnut tones, which have never been subjected to the harsh chemical dyes or poor water conditions of the capital. At the same time, merchants negotiate with international traders to import bulk shipments of coarse horsehair from the fields of Flanders and resilient goat hair from the Ottoman Empire, which will be hidden deep within the inner layers of the periwig to provide structural height and maintain the crispness of the curls over time. Each shipment arrives at the hidden Versailles workshops, wrapped carefully in clean linen cloths to protect it from dust of the palace chimneys and the pervasive smoke of the palace chimneys. The master craftsmen receive these bundles with practiced reverence, untying the coarse twine and laying the long, shimmering tresses across smooth walnut, sorting tables under the natural light of the high windows. The air in the sorting room becomes lightly perfumed with the faint, pastoral scent of dried lavender and chamomile, which the country girls use to wash their hair before it is harvested for the royal enterprise. With infinite patience, assistants use wide-toothed horncombs to untangle the bundles, working from the tips to the roots with a soft, rhythmic whispering sound that fills the quiet workspace for hours on end. Every single strand must be inspected for consistency of thickness, length, and strength, as the structural upon uniformity of the raw material depends entirely upon the uniformity of the raw material. Hair that is too brittle or shows signs of splitting is immediately cast aside into wicker baskets, leaving only the most perfect, resilient silk to be catalogued and prepared for the next stage of processing. Jean-Baptiste Colbert carefully tracks the cost of these acquisitions in his leather-bound ledgers. I'm recognizing that this heavy initial expenditure will eventually pay dividends by establishing Paris as the undisputed capital of European luxury and fashion. By controlling the supply chains of raw hair across the continent, France effectively dictating the pricing and availability of the material, making it nearly impossible for foreign rivals to compete with the quality of French production. As the piles of sorted hair grow higher, reflecting the soft gold and deep brown hues of the afternoon sun, the workshops begin to resemble a treasury of organic silk, a wealth born of the common people, but destined to crown the absolute ruler of the state. The meticulous nature of this sorting process ensures that the foundation of the King-S public image is built upon flawless stability, mirroring the absolute political stability he demands from his court and his subjects. The extensive acquisition of raw materials is merely the prelude to a highly sophisticated chemical and physical processing phase designed to strip the hair of its natural oils and fortify it against the demanding climate of the royal court. In a secondary workshop, located in a lower vaulted chamber near the palace kitchens, large copper cauldrons bubble gently over small, controlled charcoal fires, filling the air with a thick, herbal steam. Here, master artisans subjects of human hair and animal fibers to a series of secretive boiling treatments, using precise mixtures of alum, wine vinegar, and distilled spring water to cleanse the strands without stripping away their inherent elasticity. This delicate boiling process requires constant monitoring, as even a slight variant silk to contract or become hopelessly brittle, ruining weeks of rural harvesting labour. Once the initial cleansing is complete, the hair is submerged in large stoneware vats filled with cold infusions of dried cloves, which slowly neutralizes the natural, and wild marjoram, which slows musky scent of the horsehair and replaces it with a subtle, aristocratic fragrance. The artisans use long wooden paddles with the hypnotic rhythm, ensuring that the aromatic liquids penetrate the deep center of every tightly bound tress. After several hours of soaking, the wet hair is carefully lifted from the vats and draped over long wooden drying racks set up in a drafty stone corridor where the natural currents can dry the fibres evenly. As the moisture slowly evaporates, the workers use fine linen cloths to press out the remaining droplets, handling each section with the utmost care to prevent any tangling or breakage. The dry hair is then subjected to a rigorous brushing process, using specialized cards lined with thousands of short iron needles, which align the cuticles of the strands and remove any remaining impurities or short, unusable fibers. This intense processing phase transforms the raw, rustic material into a highly refined, uniform product that possesses a mirror-like shine and a clean, neutral scent perfectly suited for the refined sensibilities of the royal bedchamber. Jean-Baptiste Colbert frequently sends his clerks to audit the output of this department, ensuring that the volume of processed hair matches the strict consumption quotas established for the king's grand design. The success of this chemical treatment is critical, for if the periwig were to retain any natural moisture or organic oils, it would quickly attract pests or begin to sag under the heavy humidity of the palace dining halls, shattering the illusion of royal perfection. As the processed hair is gathered into clean wooden trays, categorized by color and exact length, the workshop prepares to transition from the raw preparation of material to the precise architectural engineering of the wig's structural frame. With the premium raw materials meticulously cleansed, scented and sorted, the artisans transition into the highly specialized phase of neutralizing the naturally coarse texture of animal hair to match the supreme softness of the human silk. In a brightly lit section of the workshop, masters sit at long tables with small ivory bowls filled verkep hat refined bear grease, clarified beef tallow, and expensive almond oils imported from the southern provinces. These rich pomades are worked into the thick horsehair and goat hair fibers by hand, a slow and exhausting process that requires the workers to rub every single bundle between their palms until the grease is entirely absorbed into the core of the strand. This softening ritual is essential, as the stiff animal fibers will form the dense interior crown of the long periwig, providing the dramatic height that will lift the King-S profile above scratching's toileted ministers without scratching his delicate scalp. The workspace becomes intensely silent, filled only with the rhythmic, wet, sliding sound of grist fly fibers and the soft breathing of the craftsman under the golden light of the oil lamps. To lock in this newfound flexibility and prevent the grease from leaking out during the warmth of court balls, the treated hair is dusted with an ultra-fine powder made from crushed rice, wheat starch, and pulverized iris roots, creating a protective barrier that seals the moisture inside. This dusting process creates a pale, ethereal cloud that hangs softly in the air of the room, settling like a layer of fresh winter frost over the dark oak workbenches and the clothing of the artisans. Jean-Baptiste Colbert monitors the distribution of these starches and oils with precise administrative care, integrating the massive consumption of agricultural products into his broader economic calculations for the realm's internal trade. If you find peace and relaxation in these quiet details of history, please consider subscribing to the channel to support our ongoing historical research. As the twilight deepens outside the tall palace windows, the processed bundles are laid out in neat rows on cedarwood shelves, their surfaces glowing With a soft, matte white finish that looks remarkably like the powdered stone of the classic Roman busts that line the royal galleries. The complete transformation of these raw, rustic materials into a highly engineered, fragrant, and pliable substance underscores the total dominance of art over nature that defines every aspect of the Sun King's reign, laying the groundwork for the intricate stitching process that will soon commence on the custom wooden blocks. Then, the engineering of the periwig shifts from the chemical preparation of the fibres to the delicate structural work of constructing the interior foundation. A task that requires the steady hands of the workshop's most senior lace weavers. At the centre of each workbench sits a custom beechwood block, onto which the craftsmen pin a fine, flesh-coloured net woven from the strongest raw silk imported from the spinning mills of Lyon. This silk foundation must be incredibly light to allow the king's scalp to breathe, yet resilient enough to bear the immense physical weight of several pounds of cascading curls without stretching or warping out of shape over months of use. Using microscopic bronze needles, the artisans pull individual strands of the prepared human hair through the tiny holes of the mesh, securing each one with a specialized double knot known only to the elite members of the Paris Guild. The room is filled, a dense rhythmic silence punctuated only by the tiny metallic click of needles passing through the net and the soft friction of silk thread being drawn taut by practiced fingers. Every row of knots is placed with architectural precision, starting at the nape of the neck and working upward in tight, concentric circles that mimic the natural direction of human hair growth but with triple the density. To provide the towering vertical elevation demanded by the king, the artisans weave a rigid subterranean framework of fine wires wrapped in soft wool ribbon to soft ribbon, forming a hidden scaffold over the crown of the wooden block. This metallic skeleton is sewn directly into the silk mesh, creating a raised platform that will lift the top layer of curls a full 6 inches above the natural brow line, effectively increasing the monarch's physical height during formal state processions. Beruria patrols the rows of silent workers, holding a tallow candle close to the lace to ensure that the knots are entirely invisible from the outside and that the spacing remains completely uniform. Any knot that is slightly loose or out of alignment is immediately snipped away with small sharp iron shears, as even a minor structural épleur. A vaquep could cause a section of the periwig or the sudden movement of the powder, or the sudden movements of the king. The extraordinary level of concentration required for this work strains the eyes of the oldest masters, who must work under the dim, flickering light of oil lamps, their shadow shapes stretching across the stone walls like ancient scholars cataloguing a sacred text. This invisible lace matrix forms the silent skeleton of the entire wig empire, a masterpiece of textile engineering that transforms a chaotic mass of loose hair into a disciplined, majestic monument of absolute royal authority. Once the intricate lace foundation is fully stabilized upon the beechwood blocks, the artisans begin the highly critical allonge process of creating the grand, iconic allonge curls, a task that demands a deep understanding of thermodynamics and material memory. The workshop transforms into a scene of quiet, controlled heat, as small charcoal braziers are coaxed into a steady, smokeless glow in the centre of the room, their warmth radiating softly against the damp stone floor. The master wigmakers use specialized curling cylinders made from refined pipe clay, which have been thoroughly baked in pottery kilns to ensure they can retain an even temperature without cracking or scorching the fragile hair fibers. Assistants carefully divide the long strands of human hair and resilient horsehair into equal sections, painting each tress with a light, sticky solution of gum arabic and distilled rosewater to act as a natural setting agent. With smooth, practiced movements of their fingers, the craftsmen tightly wrap the damp hair around the warm clay cylinders, working from the root down to the tip to ensure that the curl develops a uniform, spring-like elasticity. The room fills with a gentle, sweet hiss as the moisture from the gum solution contacts the heated clay, releasing a fragrant, clean vapor of roses and toasted earth that drifts lazily toward the vaulted ceiling. Every cylinder is tied securely in place with strips of wet linen tape, preventing the tightly wound fibers from shifting or unraveling as they undergo the long, slow cooling process that locks the structural memory into the hair. Berruria checks the temperature of each pipe clay rod by holding the back of his hand an inch away from the surface, utilizing decades of sensory experience to ensure the heat is sufficient to reshape the hair without drying out its natural, healthy luster. This precise application of heat is what separates the elite Parisian craftsman from common village barbers, as a single overheated rod could permanently singe the premium white and chestnut hairs, forcing the workshop to abandon weeks of tedious sorting and weaving labour. The wrapped blocks are then transferred to a specialised drying cabinet lined with cedar wood panels, where they will sit in absolute stillness for 24 hours to allow the starch and gum mixture to fully cure. This deep thermal manipulation of the fibres ensures will retain their crisp cascading shape even when subjected to the stifling heat of crowded palace balls or the damp, foggy air of morning military reviews. As the braziers slowly burn down to silent grey ash, the artisans leave the cabinet sealed, letting the quiet dark of the workshop preserve the emerging symmetry of the king's new majestic crown. The opening of the sealed cedarwood cabinets reveals the spectacular success of the thermal setting process, as the long tresses emerge entirely transformed into a dense, interlocking network of crisp architectural waves. The master artisans now confront the complex challenge of assembling the Grand Allonge architecture, a structural design that requires blending the various types of hair into a single, continuous and majestic silhouette. This unique configuration is defined by a distinct division of layers, where the long, stiff horsehair bundles are meticulously integrated beneath the fine human silk to create a permanent internal cushion of support. The craftsmen position themselves around the beechwood blocks with wide horn combs and long bronze styling needles, working with an extraordinary level of patience to layer the curls with absolute geometric precision. The structure is designed to rise in two distinct symmetrical peaks above the forehead, creating a magnificent framing effect that accentuates the sharp lines of the king-s jaw, while casting a flattering shadow over his brow. From these elevated peaks, the curls are trained to fall backward over the shoulders, in long, heavy cascades that reach all the way down to the middle of the back, mirroring the dramatic flow of classic Roman drapery found in royal sculpture. Berruria utilizes a specialized wooden gauge to measure the volume and depth of the side sections, ensuring that the hair frames the face perfectly without obscuring the royal profile or interfering with the movement of the king's ears during important state conversations. Every individual curl is gently pulled, fluffed, and then stitched directly into the underlying silk mesh, using a hidden from dropping or separating under its own immense weight. The workspace becomes thick with the rich, heavy aroma of powdered starch and dried orris root as the assistants begin the initial dressing of the exterior layers, using fine horsehair brushes to blend the boundaries between the human hair and the synthetic structure beneath. This delicate integration ensures that the entire assembly moves as a single organic entity, responding to the movements of the body with a heavy, rhythmic sway that projects an undeniable aura of weight, permanence, and unyielding dignity. Jean-Baptiste Colbert watches the progress of this styling phase through his inspectors, recognizing that this specific silhouette will soon become the French administrative dominance throughout the Western world. As the final structural pins are quietly removed from the wood, the monumental headpiece stands the common reality's defiance, a towering monument of common realities of nature. The heavy oak doors of the inner private salon are locked from within, isolating the young king, Berrurier, and the premier valets from the intense scrutiny of the outer apartments as the moment of the first royal fitting arrives. On a velvet-covered table sits the completed allonge periwig, its massive powdered curls resting over the beechwood mould like a silent, waiting crown of state. Louis XIV steps forward, his expression exceptionally calm, but his valets gently lift the monumental structure by its internal silk frame, preparing to place it over his natural thinning hair for the first time. The transition is a quiet, profound revelation, as the heavy weight of the periwig settles onto the royal scalp, its internal wire scaffolding instantly providing 6 inches entire physical posture. Berrurier leans forward, kept hat a silver styling needle, adjusting the delicate lace edge along the forehead with microscopic precision to ensure the transition from skin to artificial hair is entirely seamless and undetectable. As the king turns his head slowly from side to side, the great mountains of curls respond with a heavy, predictable sway that completely masks the fragile mortal shape beneath, replacing it with the eternal, unchanging silhouette of the Sun King. The mirror reflects an image of boundless youth, vigor, and architectural perfection, completely erasing the anxiety of the past months and providing the monarch with an ironclad psychological armor for the public battles ahead. Louis adjusts his shoulders, feeling the structural balance of the piece, and nods his silent approval to the Mars craftsmen who have successfully turned a personal physical crisis into a supreme triumph of royal imagery. Outside the room, the morning sun finally breaks through the thick clouds, illuminating the grand mirrors of the palace galleries and setting the stage for a spectacular public debut that will alter the course of European court history forever. The massive gilded doors of the king's private apartments swing outward with a heavy, resonant groan to a packed, expectant trio ding of ministers, generals, and ambitious nobles. As the Sun King takes his first majestic steps into the great gallery, a sudden breathless silence falls over the grand hall, replacing the chaotic murmur of political gossip with a wave of absolute awe. The monarch moves with a slow, theatrical deliberation, his head held remarkably high under the immense cascading weight of the newly completed allonge periwig. The dark, perfectly structured waves of hair catch the morning light, streaming through the massive arched windows, throwing off a fine, shimmering cloud of white powder verkette every measured step he takes. Courtiers instinctively push backward against the marble walls, their eyes wide with astonishment, who appears less like a mortal man, less like an eternal, and more like an eternal classical deity descended from the ceilings of the palace. The sheer volume of the headpiece, king's physical presence, broadening his shoulders, lengthening his profile, and creating an undeniable illusion of youthful vigor that completely erases any whispered rumors of illness or physical decay. Among the crowd, the foreign ambassadors from Spain and England exchange subtle, serious glances, instantly recognizing that this spectacular presentation is not a mere display of vanity, but a powerful, calculated assertion of absolute domestic stability and cultural dominance. The young king permits himself a brief, unreadable smile as he perceives the profound impact of his new appearance, knowing that his secret is now perfectly secure behind this magnificent, state-sanctioned fortress of hair. Every line of the periwig's architecture projects an image of unyielding order and supreme command, establishing a visual boundary between the sovereign and his subjects that is as absolute as the law itself. As Louis takes his seat upon the silver throne at the far end of the gallery, the great curls settle around his velvet robes in perfect symmetrical harmony, marking the definitive commencement of an era where style and statecraft are inextricably bound together. The dazzling spectacle of the king's public debut instantly codifies a strict, immutable law throughout the crowded corridors of Versailles, turning the allongé periwig from a personal cover into an absolute obligation of courtly life. To appear before Louis Bone without this towering monument of hair is suddenly viewed as an unpardonable act of political defiance, an insult to the carefully engineered majesty of the sovereign, and a signs of dangerous eccentricity. Within days of the first grand audience, the elite nobility realizes that their old, natural hairstyles are completely obsolete, resembling the rustic fashions of a provincial past that has no place in the brilliant modern sun of the new regime. Dukes, marquises, and counts scrambled urgent messages to their personal agents in Paris, desperate to secure the services of any artisan who can replicate the precise, jewel-peaked architecture of the royal headpiece. The atmosphere within the palace staterooms shifts dramatically as the visual landscape becomes entirely uniform, dominated by a sea of cascading white, black, and chestnut curls that sway in rhythmic unison vers capite at every bow and curtsy. This uniform presentation serves a profound political purpose for the king, as it effectively flattens the individual visual families of the old troublesome feudal families, absorbing their heritage into a single state-sanctioned aesthetic, controlled entirely by the crown. Jean-Baptiste Colbert carefully notes this behavioral shift in his administrative ledgers, recognizing that the nobility's sudden obsession with luxury hair will drain their personal wealth, forcing them to depend heavily on royal pensions and favors to maintain their standing. The massive consumption of fine silk netting, pipe clay rods, and aromatic starches ripples through the merchant quarters of Paris, igniting an explosive commercial demand that catches many traditional guildmasters for the sheer volume of orders. Every courtier understands that their physical proximity to the king is directly tied to how perfectly they conform to his visual standards, making the periwig a literal yardstick of proximity to absolute power. As the warm afternoon sun illuminates the Hall of Mirrors, reflecting thousands of identical manufactured curls against the gilded stucco walls, the court transforms into a beautifully choreographed theatre, where nature has been entirely banished in favour of supreme royal artifice. The rigid codification of the allong wig as a mandatory requirement for royal favour forces the Patigahat aristocracy of France not to a prance to submit to a deeply uncomfortable physical transformation, altering their personal hygiene and daily routines in an unprecedented manner, to ensure that the massive heavy wire scaffolds and dense layers of horsehair sit flat and secure upon the head without sliding during complex court dances. Nobles are forced to completely sacrifice their natural hair. In the early hours of the morning, before the palace wakes, private apartments across Versailles fill with the cold, scraping sound of sharp iron razors moving over bare skin, as personal valids systematically shave the scalps of dukes, counts, and marquises. This ritualistic removal of natural hair is an act of total symbolic submission to the absolute will of the Sun King, leaving the proudest men in the realm entirely bald, exposed, and vulnerable within the privacy of their dressing rooms. The sensation of the cold morning draught against a freshly shaved scalp creates a jarring contrast of the massive periwigs that the suffocating samwarms that will soon cover them for the remainder of the long day. Once the skin is wiped clean hat bitter vinegar and dried with linen towels, the valets apply a thin layer of sticky resin or animal fat to the scalp, acting as a primitive adhesive to prevent the smooth silk netting of the wig from shifting during formal movements. The physical weight of an executive-grade allonge periwig can easily exceed 4 pounds, pressing down continuously upon the temples and the base of the skull, causing chronic headaches and deep red indentations in the skin that persist long after the headpiece is removed at night. During the humid summer months, the interior of these grand structures becomes an insufferable prison of heat, trapping perspiration against the skin and creating a breeding ground for persistent irritation that cannot breaking the strict etiquette of the court without breaking the strict beat of the court, to claw at one's head or to disturb the perfect alignment of the curls, while in the presence of the sovereign is viewed as a grotesque breach of manners, forcing courtiers to maintain a perfectly serene, mask-like expression while enduring intense physical discomfort. Jean-Baptiste Colbert watches these developments with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that a nobility consumed by the continuous maintenance of their physical appearance and the immense expenses of personal grooming left to plot regional rebellions against the central authority of the crown. The absolute erasure of natural hair throughout the court symbolizes the total victory of human design over the organic world, turning every noble into a uniform, manufactured ornament designed solely to reflect the unmatched brilliance of the sovereign-s universe. The daily reality of life beneath these monumental structures gives rise to a specialized culture within the private ukachas, personal maintenance and private quarters of the aristocracy. As the initial novelty of the allonge periwig transitions into a permanent societal fixture, the interior design of noble townhouses in Paris and apartments in Versailles must adapt to accommodate the intense grooming needs of their owners. Special dressing rooms known as cabinets de toilette are constructed veille-kept, hat remold, reinforced shelving and heavy walnut stands designed specifically to hold multiple variations of the grand headpiece, categorized by the formality of the hour. The air in these private chambers is permanently thick, with a dense hanging cloud of fine white powder, which settles over the dark wood furniture, the velvet wall hangings, wiffia balls, and the polished floors like a layer of perpetual dust. Personal valets spend hours every morning preparing the wigs before they touch their masters' shaved heads, using long iron curling tongs heated over small charcoal braziers to crisp the waves that may have sagged during the damp night hours. The dry, bitter smell of scorched hair and animal grease frequently mingles with the expensive perfume oils, creating a distinct olfactory signature that defines the private living quarters of the 17th century elite. To protect their costly clothing from the white deluge of starch and pulverized iris root, nobles must wear large, protective linen capes that cover them from the chin to the floor, while their valets aggressively shake powder over the completed leather periwig. Using specialized leather bellows, this process requires a delicate touch, as an uneven distribution of powder would create unsightly heavy patches that would ruin the architectural symmetry of the cascading curls and draw the quiet ridicule of rival courtiers. Once the dusting is complete, the noble steps out of the linen cape completely transformed, their natural human shape buried beneath a rigid, artificial mountain of pure white and silver waves that commands immediate respect. The physical sensation of wearing this heavy powdered monument shapes the very way the aristocracy moves, forcing them to maintain an exceptionally straight spine, a slow gliding gait, and a deliberate tilt of the chin to prevent the entire structure from toppling forward during a greeting. This forced regality of posture is exactly what the Sun King desires, as it transforms his entire court into a slow-moving, heavily stylized pageant, where every marble monument dedicates a walkable monument dedicated to the grandeur of his reign. As the long hours of the morning progress into afternoon audiences, the continuous pressure of the internal wire framework against the temples remains a constant, throbbing reminder of the price one must pay to remain visible in the competitive universe of Versailles. The immense physical contrast between the magnificent public image of the French aristocracy and the private realities of their daily health creates a fascinating chapter in the social history of the social Versailles court. Under the heavy, immovable layers of the Alonga periwig, the shaved scalps of the nobility from the natural circulation of fresh air for 12 to 14 hours a day. Presenting an unprecedented challenge to the rudimentary medical knowledge of the 17th century, of the 17th Friedhof. The continuous application of thick pomades, heavy animal fats, and dense wheat starches creates an environment of intense warmth and moisture against the skin, which naturally leads to various forms of persistent cutaneous irritation and dryness. Because the strict etiquette established by Louis XIV demands that a courtier never show any sign of physical discomfort or personal distraction in the royal presence, nobles must develop an extraordinary level of self-control to endure the constant, quiet itchings that develops beneath their silk-lined headpieces, to address these delicate scalp conditions without compromising their standing or breaking the illusion of effortless perfection. The elite turn to the palace. Specialized apothecaries who formulate a wide array of aromatic, soothing treatments designed specifically to calm the irritated skin. Long rows of blue and white porcelain jars fill the shelves of the court pharmacies, containing cooling ointments made from distilled juices, clarified cucumber juices, and the pressed oils of sweet almonds mixed with fine white wax. Every evening, after the formal grand coucher ceremony concludes and the heavy periwigs are finally returned to their wooden stands, personal valets gently cleanse their masters' bare scalps with linen cloths soaked in warm infusions of elderflower and wild thyme, which possess natural antiseptic properties to reduce redness and restore balance to the skin. This nightly cleansing ritual becomes a crucial moment of physical relief for the weary courtiers, a quiet interlude where the heavy burdens of state vanity are temporarily washed away in the soft light of a single candle. Furthermore, to combat the natural attraction of small seasonal pests to the warm starch-filled fibres of the wigs, the master artisans weave tiny, elegant traps made of pierced ivory or gold filigree directly into the deep interior layers of the horsehair structure, filling them with a few drops of sweet honey or sticky resin to quietly neutralize any intrusion before it can disturb the wearer. Jean-Baptiste Colbert watches the production of these high-end pharmaceutical commodities with his usual administrative focus, recognizing that the health and comfort of the ruling class, a secondary highly lucrative domestic industry of specialized skincare and hygiene products, become The continuous refinement of these aromatic remedies underscores the remarkable domestic Christians absorb every minor domestic crisis and transform it into an occasion for further luxury consumption, ensuring that even the invisible physical trials of the nobility are met with the highest standards of artistic and elegant craftsmanship. As the night deepens over the quiet palace wings, the soothing scents of lavender, mint, and orris root linger softly in the dressing rooms, preparing the skin for another long day of majestic display under the unwavering sun of absolute monarchy. The intricate maintenance of the royal headpieces naturally extends into the deep hours of the night, giving rise to a highly specialized nocturnal routine that ensures each monument of hair remains entirely schedule of state ceremonies. When the Sun King finally retires to his bedchamber after the lengthy public dinner, the grand allonge periwig he wore throughout the afternoon is received by Berrurier with the utmost reverence, held aloft on an ivory rod to prevent any compression of its cascading side waves. The majestic structure is immediately transported through the silent service corridors to a dedicated nightly maintenance salon, where a specialized team of assistants works under the soft, cool, warm glow of multiple oil lamps to repair the minor structural damages caused by a day of heavy movement, formal bowing, and environmental exposure. The air in this nightly workshop is crisp and clear, kept at a constant, cool temperature to prevent the natural oils within the human hair fibers from softening or losing their grip on the underlying silk foundation. Artisans use long, slender bronze needles to gently lift and realign any individual curls that may have lost their perfect geometric symmetry. During the intense heat of the evening audiences, if you find peace and a deep sense of calm in these quiet, detailed journeys through the hidden corners of history, please consider subscribing to the channel to support our ongoing historical research. Every section of the wig is carefully brushed out with fine badger hair brushes, removing the top layer of old, yellowed starch powder that has accumulated over the past 14 hours and replacing it with a fresh, pristine dusting of triple sifted wheat flour, scented with the delicate essence of dried orange blossoms. This continuous cycle of cleansing, resetting, and repowdering requires an extraordinary amount of physical endurance from the young apprentices, who must remain awake until dawn to ensure that when the monarch opens his eyes for the formal lever ceremony, a perfectly revitalized towering at his bedside is waiting at his comb. Jean-Baptiste Colbert carefully regulates the delivery of these premium nightgowns and in storage cases, recognizing that the longevity of these expensive state assets depends entirely upon the relentless, unseen labor performed while the rest of the kingdom sleeps. The silent dedication of these nocturnal craftsmen guarantees that the visual illusion of the absolute monarch never suffers from fatigue, maintaining an unbroken continuity of youthful vigor and supreme perfection that completely defies the natural passage of time. As the first pale blue lines of dawn begin to appear on the horizon, reflecting off the cold stone walls of the palace courtyard, the completed periwigs are placed inside lined cedarwood transport boxes, ready to be delivered to the Royal Political Theatre for another day of unyielding political theatre. The extraordinary demands of the nightly maintenance cycle quickly create a massive logistical challenge that threatens to exhaust local starches and specialized cosmetic powders. Statuenunners within the immediate vicinity of the capital, to maintain the striking pure white appearance of the king's allongé periwigs. The royal workshops require hundreds of pounds of ultra-fine wheat flour every week, a consumption rate that draws directly from the agricultural output of the surrounding La France region. Jean-Baptiste Colbert immediately recognizes the potential for economic friction, as the diversion of so much high-grade wheat from the public bakeries to the royal dressing rooms could easily spark classes of Paris during seasons of poor harvests. To mitigate this sensitive social risk while ensuring the Crown-S aesthetic requirements are completely satisfied, Colbert establishes a state-controlled monopoly on the production of specialized hair powders, redirecting the operations of several large mills along the Seine River exclusively to the processing of cosmetic starches. These specialized mills are ordered to grind the grain multiple times through fine silk sieves, transforming the raw wheat into a cloud-like substance that is completely free of impurities and holds an incredibly lightweight consistency. The processed starch is then transported to the palace in tightly sealed, moisture-proof leather sacks to prevent any clumping or spoilage during the humid morning river transits. Once inside the Versailles workshops, the master artisans blend this premium powder, dried lavender heads, and ground cypress wood, creating a unique formulation that not only colours the hair a magnificent uniform silver white, but also acts as a natural preservative against environmental dampness. The scent of this royal powder blend that completely defines the atmospheric identity of the palace, clinging to the gilded carvings, the velvet curtains, and the clothing of everyone who enters the royal apartments. When courtiers walk through the long galleries, they leave behind a subtle, sweet trail of iris and orange blossom, a sensory reminder of their absolute submission to the cultural standards established by the sovereign. The creation of this dedicated supply chain highlights the incredible capacity of the French administrative requirement to absorb a highly specific luxury requirement and integrate it into the broader economic structure of the nation, turning a potential resource shortage into a highly organized, state-sanctioned industry. As the wagons loaded veille capitahat fresh starch powder pass through the iron gates of the palace courtyard under the watchful eyes of the royal guards, the artisans prepare their leather bellows for the morning application, ensuring that the visual manifestation of absolute power remains completely unblemished by the natural realities of the changing seasons. The vast expansion of the specialized hair powder industry, under Colbert's watchful eye, bring the visual aesthetics of the European aristocracy anchoring the color white as the supreme shade of political loyalty and unyielding refinement. In the earlier years of the transition, courtiers often selected hair powders that matched their natural shades, ranging from warm chestnut browns to deep raven blacks, in a desperate bid to maintain the illusion of their own passing youth. However, as Louis Merbonne begins to favour the pure, pristine white formulations produced by the specialized mills along the Seine, the entire court instantly pivots to mirror the sovereign's preference, abandoning all natural colours within a matter of weeks. This sudden shift toward a uniform, snowy landscape creates in the grand galleries of Versailles creates an extraordinary visual effect, as the faces of young dukes and aging marshals alike are framed by the same timeless silver-white cascades of architectural curls. The universal adoption of white powder serves a brilliant psychological function within the theatre of absolute monarchy, effectively masking the true age of every courtier and erasing the natural physical distinctions between different generations of the nobility. In this beautifully engineered world, an ambitious 20-year-old count and a battle-weary 60-year-old general appear visually synchronized, their individual identities completely submerged beneath the same majestic, state-sanctioned mantle of silver waves. The pure white powder acts as a physical canvas that catches and amplifies the soft, golden light of the illuminating the evening balls. Making the aristocracy appear to float through the state rooms like ethereal, living statues descended from a classical paradise. To maintain this impeccable, uniform brightness throughout the lengthy, exhausting court functions are constructed in the recesses of the palace corridors, small, discreet, obvious blocks where courtiers can retire for a brief moment to have their valets refresh their periwigs with small leather bellows. This continuous collective maintenance ensures that not a single patch of natural dark hair or yellowing oil is ever exposed to the critical gaze of the public, preserving an unbroken illusion of eternal unblemished perfection. As the heavy scent of powdered iris and wheat starch settles over the assembly, the court becomes an absolute visual monoculture, a perfectly stylized universe where naturesque chaotic variety by the disciplined elegant geometries of the Sun King-esque grand design. The universal adoption of the monumental pure white Alonga periwig does far more than reshape the visual landscape of Versailles. It fundamentally re-engineers the physical gestures, body language, and daily social etiquette of the entire European aristocracy, because these massive structures weigh several pounds and are balanced precariously upon freshly shaved sculpted silks, nettings, and fine iron wires. Any sudden or uncontrolled movement threatens to destabilize the entire architectural masterpiece. A sharp turn of the head, a reckless laugh, or an overly enthusiastic gesture could cause the towering peaks of curls to slide out of alignment, exposing the bare skin beneath and subjecting the unfortunate noble to immediate public ridicule. To prevent such a catastrophic social disaster, the elite are forced to develop a completely new system of highly disciplined slow waking hour of their lives that governs every waking hour of their lives. When a duke wishes to address a companion to his left, he no longer turns his neck upper torso. He must slowly rotate his entire upper torso in a single smooth and majestic arc, ensuring that the heavy cascading curls over his shoulders sway in a perfectly controlled, predictable rhythm. This forced deliberation of movement lends an aura of immense gravity and theatrical stateliness to the most ordinary conversations, making the courtiers appear like living marble statues gliding effortlessly through the gilded galleries of the palace. Furthermore, the traditional act of greeting a social superior requires a complete transformation, as the standard deep bow of the previous generation is now far too dangerous for a man wearing a 6-inch tall mountain of powdered hair. Courtiers invent a specialized, highly stylized greeting known as the periwig bow, where the spine remains completely straight while the hips are bent at a strict, shallow angle, allowing the body to decline slightly without letting the top heavy weight of the headpiece pull the wearer off balance. The handling of hats also becomes a precise art form, as the traditional wide-brimmed felt hats can no longer be worn over the massive crown of curls without crushing the delicate thermal setting of the waves. Instead, nobles are forced to carry their hats tucked elegantly beneath their left arm, using them purely as a symbolic prop for courtly salutations rather than functional headwear. Simultaneously, a unique subculture of secondary etiquette develops among the ladies of the court, who begin utilizing specialized ivory and lace fans not merely to cool themselves in the stifling heat of the state rooms, but to gently and discreetly brush away the fine, continuous deluge of white starch powder that drifts from the men's wigs onto the dark velvet and silk shoulders of their expensive evening gowns. This constant, silent maintenance of 1S appearance and posture creates a unique self-awareness where every single movement intense, carefully calculated, evaluated, and executed with an eye toward absolute aesthetic harmony. Berrurier and his senior assistants watch these developments from the gallery balconies with quiet pride, recognizing that their architectural the naturally wild have effectively tamed back expressive movements of the old feudal nobility, locking them into a permanent, predictable ballet of absolutes of the Sun King to the visual standards of the Sun King. Jean-Baptiste Colbert carefully notes the stabilizing effect of this rigid etiquette on court decorum, understanding that when men are entirely consumed by the physical mechanics of balancing their hair, they possess neither the focus nor the inclination to engage in sudden, volatile political outbursts against the authority of the crown. As the evening progresses and the light of thousands of wax candles reflects off the unyielding, silver-white peaks of hair, the court of Versailles operates with the flawless, silent precision of a grand mechanical clock, a universe where nature's chaotic impulses have been entirely conquered of the King-esque grand design. The complex physical restrictions imposed by the allong periwig soon transcend the limestone walls of Versailles and spread directly into the high-stakes world of international diplomacy, turning the management of luxury hair into an aggressive weapon of French foreign policy. When foreign ambassadors from London, Vienna, Madrid, or the independent republics of Italy arrive at the French court, they are immediately confronted by an overwhelming, highly synchronized wall of towering white curls that commands immediate psychological submission. To stand before the Sun King and his ministers while wearing natural hair or an outdated, poorly powdered headpiece from the provinces is to instantly signal financial weakness, where comes a lack of modern refinement and a complete misunderstanding of the current centers of global power. European diplomats find themselves caught in a fierce, deeply expensive escalation, forced to write desperate, urgent letters back to their respective sovereigns demanding massive increases in their personal allowances simply to afford the exorbitant fees charged by the elite Paris wigmakers. Jean-Baptiste Colbert capitalizes brilliantly on this diplomatic panic by implementing a series of strict tariffs and royal decrees of processed human hair that prevent the highest grades of processed human hair, specialized pipe clay curling rods, from leaving French soil without explicit state permission, ensures that foreign courts can never truly replicate the flawless structural integrity and extreme vertical elevation achieved by Berrurier's secretive Versailles workshops, keeping all non-French aristocrats in a position of permanent, visible inferiority. When a foreign ambassador attempts to negotiate a treaty or defend his country's maritime trade routes, he must do so while staring up at a French minister whose physical stature has been artificially elevated by 6 full inches, creating a subtle but continuous psychological disadvantage during long hours of intense debate. The deliberate tilt of the king's head, which causes his massive pure white curls to cascade majestically over his royal robes, is carefully timed during diplomatic audiences to project an image of unyielding, semi-divine authority that leaves no room for political compromise. If you find peace, deep relaxation, and a sense of calm in these quiet, detailed journeys through the hidden corners of history, please consider subscribing to the channel to support our ongoing historical research. To further cement this cultural dominance, Louis XIV begins gifting custom-engineered periwigs to visiting foreign monarchs and high-ranking princes as a supreme mark of royal favour, a gesture that appears incredibly generous on the surface, but carries a profound political sting. Each gifted piece is built upon a custom beechwood block maintained in the Paris archives, effectively ensuring that the recipient's public foot is forever defined, calibrated, mining, and controlled by the master craftsman of the French crown. This elegant export of style functions as a Trojan horse of absolute monarchy, embedding French aesthetic standards, French maintenance requirements, and French economic dependency directly into the heart of rival European palaces. As the foreign emissaries bowed deeply before the silver throne, their own inferior, poorly balanced periwigs, shifting uncomfortably under the critical gaze of the court, they realize that they are fighting a losing battle against an empire that has successfully transformed the vanity of luxury grooming into a unassailable art of global statecraft. The complete integration of the Alonga periwig into the mechanics of global diplomacy is a monumental shift within the economic fabric of Paris, elevating the corporate guild of master wigmakers, known as the barbiers perruquiers, into one of the most politically powerful merchant bodies in Western Europe. Recognizing that the stability of his court's grand visual design depends entirely upon a steady, highly disciplined labour force, Louis XIV issues a historic royal edict that grants this specialised guild exclusive legal rights over the purchase, processing, and sale of all human and animal hair within the boundaries of the kingdom. This sweeping protectionist measure effectively outlaws all unregulated street barbers and provincial hair merchants, forcing every single workshop from the borders of Flanders down to the Mediterranean coast to operate under the direct oversight of a centralized board of royal inspectors. Jean-Baptiste Colbert personally reviews the Guild's internal regulations, linking their commercial success to the financial health of the state by imposing a strict system of annual licensing fees that flow directly into the royal treasury and direct the royal treasury to fund the construction of Versailles. Under this new administrative framework, the title of Master Wigmaker becomes a highly coveted, immensely expensive corporate asset that can only be obtained through decades of rigorous apprenticeship, flawless technical execution, and a substantial financial payment to the crown. The internal hierarchy of these authorized workshops operates with the strict, unyielding discipline of a military regiment, where young apprentices spend their first 5 years performing nothing but the basic, exhausting tasks of sorting raw fibre by colour, washing grease from horsehair, and maintaining the charcoal braziers used to heat the heavy pipe clay curling rods. Only after proving their absolute dedication and manual precision are they permitted to touch the fine silk netting or learn the secretive double knotting techniques required to construct the invisible internal foundation of an executive-grade headpiece. The physical environment of these elite Parisian workshops reflects their newfound wealth, moving from the cramped, dark alleys of the medieval city centre to grand, multi-storey stone townhouses along the fashionable Rue Saint-Honoré, where wealthy nobles and foreign agents can browse. Finished periwigs displayed on velvet-covered pedestals under the light of large crystal chandeliers, to maintain an absolute monopoly on the most desirable aesthetics. The Guild establishes a secret tribunal that meets once a month to examine any new styling innovations, ensuring that no artisan produces a silhouette that mimic jewel-peaked architectures reserved exclusively for the person of the sovereign. Any independent operator caught smuggling raw materials or producing counterfeit copies of the royal design faces, the public burning of their inventory, the immediate financial ruin, and a permanent ban from practicing the trade within the realm. This absolute corporate structure transforms the vanity of personal grooming into a highly organized, state-sanctioned engine of industrial wealth, ensuring that every strand of hair woven in France contributes directly to the unmatched economic prestige and visual uniformity of the Sun King's absolute universe. The commercial elevation of the Parisian wigmakers guild and the absolute enforcement of the allonge silhouette rapidly accelerate a profound transformation in the social structure of the cities. The Sechuk we see dividing the urban population along a sharp, visible line of hair. In the grand public squares, fashionable promenades, and elite theatres of Paris, a man's precise place within the complex social hierarchy is instantly broadcast by the scale, colour, and powder quality of his headpiece. To navigate the competitive public spaces of the capital while wearing one's natural hair is to immediately signal to the world that one belongs to the lower classes of society. The manual labourers, street vendors, and common artisans who possess neither the time nor the financial means to participate in the court's grand ballet of artificial vanity. The rising wealthy bourgeoisie, including successful merchants, wealthy lawyers, and high-ranking judicial officials, scramble frantically to bridge this visual gap by investing immense portions of their private fortunes into acquiring their own grand periwigs. This intense social competition drives the demand for processed hair to unprecedented heights, turning the acquisition of high-grade raw materials into a relentless, cutthroat race that extends far beyond the borders of the kingdom into the neighbouring German states and the Italian peninsula, because the supply of pristine white and soft blonde human hair remain extremely limited. The prices for these premium shades skyrocket to astronomical levels, making a top-tier, custom-woven allonge periwig as expensive as a finely crafted carriage or a modest countryside estate. To accommodate the desperate financial demands of the middle classes who cannot afford Berrurier-essi elite services, secondary workshops spring up in the less fashionable quarters of Paris, utilizing complex blends of bleached goat hair, treated hemp fibers, and cheaper starches to mimic the magnificent volume of the royal models. This commercial stratification creates a highly nuanced visual language within the city, where a trained eye can instantly distinguish a genuine, executive-grade Versailles masterpiece woven verre-capité, hat-fine human silk, from a stiff, heavy provincial imitation that smells faintly of animal fat and unrefined wheat. Jean-Baptiste Colbert monitors this vast domestic market verre-capité hat exceptional administrative satisfaction, understanding that the middle class's willingness to spend their hard-earned wealth on matching the anchors the crown's cultural authority into the anchors the crown's pocket, into the very fabric of urban daily life. The continuous flow of capital from the merchant quarters directly into the pockets of the state-licensed guild masters reinforces the economic stability of the nation, ensuring that the vanity of personal grooming remains an absolute, highly productive engine of public wealth. As the evening bells ring out across the city, casting long shadows over the stone bridges of the Seine, thousands of citizens of varying ranks carefully adjust their cascading, manufactured curls before stepping out into the light of the street lamps, unified in their unmatched brilliance of the sovereign dist world. The intense social competition within the borders of Paris and the continuous, exhausting demand for premium raw materials eventually force the royal workshops to confront a highly sensitive biological reality. The inevitable, natural aging, and physical decay of the periwigs themselves, despite the relentless, highly disciplined efforts of the nightly maintenance teams and the continuous application of protective starch powders. A Grand Allongé periwig remains an organic structure at its core, subject to the slow, unyielding laws of atmospheric decomposition over months of continuous exposure to the damp, misty mornings of the Versailles gardens, and the acidic sweat generated state receptions, and the acidic generated by the wearer's skin. The fragile human hair fibres begin to lose their natural healthy elasticity. The tight, architectural symmetry of the cascading side curls slowly begins to sag under its own immense weight, while the pristine white and silver shades achieved by the specialized seine mills gradually take on a dull yellowish tint from the accumulation of old pomades and oxidized animal grease. Well, this natural degradation presents a profound psychological threat to the carefully engineered majesty of Louis XIV, as a single loose, unravelled curl or a visibly stained section of hair would immediately shatter the illusion of his eternal, semi-divine youth and expose the underlying reality of his mortality to the critical gaze of rival courtiers and foreign ambassadors. To completely eliminate this risk before it can manifest in public, Berrurier implements a strict, highly august system of rotational replacement, ensuring that the king never wears the same individual headpiece for more than 3 consecutive weeks. The master artisan constructs a specialized royal archive within the recesses of his Versailles workshop, where dozens of identical, freshly woven allongé periwigs are maintained on numbered beechwood blocks, each one calibrated to a specific degree of vertical elevation and formal volume depending on the precise nature of the day's political activities. This continuous production cycle requires an unprecedented, non-stop expenditure of labour from the guild's most senior weavers, who must work in overlapping shifts to constantly knot new strands of pristine white hair into fresh frameworks of silk netting and iron wire. If you find peace, deep relaxation, and a sense of calm in these quiet, detailed journeys through the hidden corners of history, please consider subscribing to the channel to support our ongoing historical research. The discarded periwigs, which have lost only a fraction of their initial flawless brilliance, are never thrown away. Instead, they are carefully disassembled by the younger apprentices, who reclaim the underlying wire scaffolds, wash the reusable horsehair support structures, and sell the secondary layers of hair to lower-ranking courtiers at an immense profit. This highly efficient internal economy ensures that the royal workshops operate at a level of absolute sustainability, turning the natural decay of luxury grooming products into a highly organized, plays self-funding cycle of state vanity. Jean-Baptiste Colbert closely monitors the financial ledger of this permanent replacement system, recognizing that the king's ability to project an image of unchanging, monumental perfection to the world justifies the continuous, staggering expense of maintaining an entire shadow army of nocturnal craftsmen. As the morning sun rises over the gilded roofs of the palace, illuminating a fresh, completely immaculate mountain of silver-white curls, resting at the king's bedside, the boundary between the mortal man and the eternal sovereign sub remains completely invisible, preserved by the disciplined, unyielding geometry of the grand design. The absolute necessity of maintaining a flawless, unblemished visual appearance at Motteville all times drives the technical ingenuity of Berrurier and his senior craftsmen to new heights, leading to the invention of specialized, weatherproof variations of the Grand Allongé architecture, as Louis XIV insists on maintaining his grueling, highly structured schedule of military regiments, including reviewing in the muddy plains of Flanders, inspecting the rapid construction of his massive stone aqueducts and hosting sprawling hunting parties through the damp, dense forests of Saint-Germain. The standard court wigs prove completely inadequate against the volatile, unpredictable elements of nature. A sudden, unexpected summer downpour or a thick, heavy autumn mist could instantly dissolve the delicate water-soluble gum arabic and starch powder, holding the monumental curls in place, causing the majestic peaks to collapse into a wet, heavy and unsightly mess over the royal shoulders. To prevent such a catastrophic humiliation from ever occurring in front of his troops or his foreign guests, the master wigmakers develop a highly innovative, water-resistant variation of the headpiece known specifically as the campagne periwig or la perruque de campagne. For this specialized design, the artisans completely abandon the fine, fragile human silk fibers used for the indoor palace of balls, replacing them entirely with the thickest, most resilient strands of black and dark chestnut stallion tail hair, which possess a natural weatherproof coating of coarse oils. Instead of being wound around the delicate baked pipe clay cylinders, these heavy animal fibers are boiled in a concentrated solution of copperas, natural linseed oil, and dark wood resins, which effectively darkens the colour and bakes an immutable ironclad spring memory directly into the structural core of the hair. The resulting curls are not styled into the airy, cascading waves of the standard court model, but are instead woven into hundreds of tight, compact, and interlocking ringlets that resemble the defensive configuration of a medieval chainmail shirt. This unique, tightly wound architecture allows the wind and rain to slide harmlessly off the surface of the structure, or exposing the King S shaved scalp beneath, ensuring that even in the midst of a violent driving storm on the battlefield, the sovereign remains visibly elevated, commanding by the chaotic forces of the natural world. Mondowing wool, Jean-Baptiste Colbert instantly recognizes the profound propaganda value of these weatherproof creations, commissioning a series of grand royal portraits and bronze statues that depict the king charging on horseback through turbulent weather while wearing a completely immaculate, unyielding mountain of dark curls. This brilliant integration of industrial engineering and royal imagery further solidifies the psychological boundary between the absolute monarch and ordinary men. The demonstratical presentation of the French state is completely immune to the passing seasons, the structural decay of time, and the unpredictable whims of nature. And as the king stands entirely dry and majestic beneath his waterproof fortress of hair, while his ministers and generals shiver in the cold, rain-soaked mud of the encampment, the court realizes that every aspect of human existence has been successfully subordinated to the supreme disciplined geometry of the grand design. The triumphant implementation of the weatherproof campaign periwig on the battlefields of Europe cements the allongé architecture as an absolute, permanent fixture of Western civilization, initiating a fascinating era of rapid stylistic specialization that mirrors the strict organizational hierarchy of the French state itself. As the decades progress and the initial generation of master artisans passes their secrets down to a highly disciplined league of successors, the production of luxury headpieces expands from a singular royal solution into a massive, highly complex vocabulary of social categorization. Every distinct profession, social rank, and formal occasion within the realm is assigned its own specific variation of the grand periwig, creating a rigid visual code where a man's entire life story, financial net worth, and political utility can be instantly decoded from a distance of 50 paces. For the highest members of the judiciary and the royal magistrates who sit in the high courts of Parliament, the artisans design a specialised, incredibly solemn variation known as the broad-bottom periwig, which abandons the airy, romantic cascades of the Versailles ballroom in favour of a dense, heavy, and square-shaped mantle of thick grey waves that frame the face like a massive stone archway. This rigid architectural layout is intended to project an aura of absolute unyielding legal authority, completely neutralizing the personal emotions or human frailties of the individual judge and replacing them with the eternal, unchanging mask of royal justice. Simultaneously, for the young, ambitious military officers serving in the elite cavalry regiments, the workshops invent the highly dynamic Ramillies periwig, which tames the massive volume of the side sections by drawing the long rear tresses into a single black silk ribbon queue tied with a thick black silk ribbon at the nape of the neck, allowing for complete freedom of movement during a chaotic cavalry charge, while still maintaining the mandatory appearance of courtly refinement. Even the clergy is brought into this grand visual alignment, as bishops and high specialized are permitted to wear a specialized, modest variation of the white powdered headpiece that features a small, discreetly shaved circular patch at the very crown to mimic the traditional monastic requirements of the king's tonsure, while still conforming to the elegant requirements of the king's presence. Jean-Baptiste Colbert carefully catalogues these stylistic variations within his central administrative registers, treating each distinct periwig design as an official uniform of the state, protected from unauthorized modification, and taxed accordingly to ensure a permanent flow of revenue into the royal treasury. This total organization of the visual world ensures that the court of Versailles operates with the absolute predictable precision of a vast bureaucratic machine transforming the fluid, unpredictable diversity of human society into a beautifully choreographed pageant where every individual functions as a static, manufactured monument dedicated to the supreme glory of the sovereign's reign. As the long afternoon sun throws deep shadows across the marble floors of the grand ministries, reflecting off thousands of identical, professionally calibrated peaks of hair, the aristocracy moves through their daily routines with a profound sense of shared identity, completely locked within the disciplined, unyielding geometry of the grand design. The relentless expansion of this highly specialized visual hierarchy eventually begins to take a subtle but undeniable toll on the physical health and daily stamina of the aging monarch, forcing Berrurier to confront the final, most delicate design challenge of his long career. As Louis Mourbon enters the mature years of his historic reign, the long decades of carrying several pounds of heavy horsehair, tight iron wire scaffolds, and dense layers of starch powder upon his temples begin to exacerbate the natural aches, neck stiffness, and physical fatigue that come with advanced age. The grueling daily schedule of the court remains entirely unchanged, requiring the sovereign to stand for hours during exhausting diplomatic audiences, walk through the long stone galleries of Versailles, and remain perfectly upright during lengthy state banquets without ever showing a single hint of human weakness or physical decay. To alleviate the king's growing physical burden, while strictly preserving the grand towering silhouette that the entire world associates with absolute power, Berrurier initiates a highly sophisticated engineering project within the deepest recesses of his private workshop. The master artisan systematically replaces the heavy iron structural wires within the foundation of the royal along periwigs with ultra-lightweight, flexible slivers of premium whalebone and dried hollow reeds, which are meticulously shaved down to reduce weight while maintaining structural strength. Simultaneously, the internal lining of dense, heavy silk canvas is replaced with an incredibly airy, open-weave mesh made from the finest linen threads imported from Flanders, allowing the heat from the king's scalp to dissipate more naturally during the long, humid hours of summer audiences. Instead of using the heavy, coarse stallion tail hair for the core structural volume, Berrurier weavers spend months collecting the finest, thinnest strands of natural human hair from young children in the high alpine valleys, which possess a hollow, weightless quality that provides immense visual volume without adding any unnecessary physical pressure to the skull. If you find peace, deep relaxation, and a sense of calm in these quiet, detailed journeys through the hidden corners of history, please consider subscribing to the channel to support our ongoing historical research. This custom-engineered masterpiece, known within the secret workshop logs as the featherweight periwig, achieves the exact same monumental height and cascading grandeur as the standard court model, yet it weighs less than a third of the pieces worn by the younger, unsuspecting courtiers. When Louis XIV first places this advanced structural creation upon his head, he feels an immediate sense of lightness and physical relief, allowing him to move through the crowded state rooms with a renewed, effortless grace that completely astounds the foreign ambassadors who had been closely watching for any sign of royal decline. The successful deployment of this invisible technology highlights the ultimate triumph of French craftsmanship, proving that the appearance of absolute, unyielding majesty can be quietly application of industrial innovation, ensuring that the visual foundation of the state remains entirely unshakable until the very end, as the evening candles are lit across the grand salon, casting a warm golden glow over the immaculate, silver-white peaks of the king's hair. The illusion of eternal youth remains completely flawless, preserved by the disciplined, unyielding geometry of the grand design. The seamless success of the featherweight periwig ensures that the aging Sun King can maintain his towering public presence without a single hint of physical vulnerability, but it also triggers an intense, hyper-competitive wave of technological espionage among the rival factions of the court, as the younger generation of ambitious dukes and ministers observe the king renewed agility during long state processions. They instantly deduce that Berrurier has unlocked a new structural secret within the royal hair laboratories. Desperate to lighten their own physical burdens and gain a distinct psychological advantage in the royal presence, high-ranking nobles begin offering astronomical bribes to the junior weavers and apprentice of the Versailles workshops, hoping to steal the precise engineering specifications of the whalebone and hollow reed frameworks. This quiet, cutthroat struggle for luxury comfort transforms the daily atmosphere of the palace into a dense web of surveillance, where courtiers discreetly watch the subtle swaying motions of their rivals' headpieces, looking for any clue that might reveal a lighter, more advanced interior architecture. Jean-Baptiste Colbert intercepts several of these corporate espionage plots through his vast network of domestic informants, recognizing that any unregulated proliferation of the king's unique structural exceptionalism that keeps the sovereign explicitly elevate would dilute the explicitly elevated above his subjects. To protect the integrity of the crown's aesthetic monopoly, Colbert places the royal workshops under an immediate, high-security lockdown, ordering armed guards to patrol the perimeter of the weaving rooms and mandating that all raw materials, custom beechwood blocks, and structural blueprints be locked in iron-bound chests at the conclusion of every working day. Master Berrurier himself is granted a personal royal escort to ensure his absolute safety from desperate nobles or force him to reveal the secrets of the hollow reed. The secrets of the hollow reed foundation. This high-stakes containment of style underscores the remarkable reality of the late 17th century French state, where the engineering of a luxury hairpiece is treated with the exact same level of national security, administrative rigour, and strategic protection as the manufacturing of gunpowder or the casting of bronze naval cannons. The absolute preservation of this technological barrier guarantees that while the rest of the nobility continues to sweat, ache, and suffer under the heavy, all the hands-on 4-pound burdens of traditional horsehair structures, the king remains a figure of effortless, unbothered lightness, gliding through the long, humid corridors of the Hall of Mirrors, like a weightless, semi-divine the physical laws that govern ordinary mortal men, as the deep night falls over the palace gardens, and the silent weavers resume their delicate knotting under the watchful eyes of the royal sentries. The unyielding boundary between the sovereign and the court remains entirely secure, locked within the disciplined protective geometry of the grand design. The rigid containment of Berrurier's structural secrets keeps the sovereign explicitly elevated above his exhausting court, but as the final decade of the 17th century approaches, the physical geography of Versailles itself undergoes a massive expansion that tests the limits of the periwig-esque cultural dominance. The completion of the monumental north and south wings brings thousands of new provincial nobles, military officers, and minor administrative corridors swirling into the palace clerks, all desperate to secure a sliver of royal recognition. This massive influx of ambitious newcomers creates an immediate and overwhelming luxury economy as the supply of premium white powder, fine silk netting, and high-grade human hair is completely swallowed up by the relentless demand of the expanding court. To prevent the visual landscape of Versailles from degenerating into a chaotic mix of inferior, poorly maintained hairstyles that would insult the carefully engineered majesty of the state, the crown is forced to implement an extraordinary system of spatial regulation. Under the direct guidance of Jean-Baptiste Colbert's administrative successors, the palace gates are transformed into strict aesthetic checkpoints, where royal officers meticulously inspect the appearance of everyone seeking entry. A provincial nobleman who has travelled for weeks from the deep south of France may be abruptly turned away at the threshold if his allongé periwig fails to meet the precise vertical height requirements or shows visible signs of yellowing grease and unrefined starch. This administrative filtering ensures that only the absolute pinnacle of stylistic perfection is permitted to step onto the polished marble floors of the state apartments, transforming the entire palace into a highly curated, living museum of absolute uniformity. If you find peace, deep relaxation, and a sense of calm in these quiet, detailed journeys through the hidden corners of history, please consider subscribing to the channel to support our ongoing historical research. To accommodate those who are excluded by these harsh standards, a secondary tier of merchant shops establishes a bustling, permanent encampment just outside the palace iron gates, offering emergency wig rentals, rapid powdering services, and instant structural repairs for a staggering fee. A desperate courtier can step into these dark, starch-filled tents, surrender a substantial portion of his gold coins, and emerge an hour later with a perfectly towering silver-white monument that grants him safe passage past the watchful eyes of the royal guards. This commercial militarization of style highlights the incredible totalizing power of the Sun King-esque cultural apparatus, which effectively forces every individual within its orbit to choose between total aesthetic conformity or absolute social invisibility. As the heavy wagons loaded verkepiter, hat freshly rented periwigs and premium flour sacks rattle across the cobblestone sigh, continues to spin with flawless, mechanical precision. A universe where every single strand of hair operates under the strict, unyielding discipline of the sovereign-esque grand design. The rigorous aesthetic filtering at the palace gates successfully maintains the immaculate visual uniformity of Versailles. But it also triggers an unexpected, deep psychological transformation within the internal minds of the French aristocracy. As the years bleed into decades under this permanent regime of artificial hair, the nobility begins to develop a propensity on their monumental long periwigs, completely blurring the line between their true biological selves and their manufactured personas. To be seen in public without the towering structure of powdered curls is no longer viewed merely as a minor fashion misstep. It is treated as a form of social nudity, an absolute exposure of physical vulnerability that strips a man of his artificial dignity, his political authority, and his entire identity within the court. The private moments of changing or maintaining the periwig, which take place behind the closed doors of the dressing rooms, become highly guarded, become secretive rituals wrapped in an atmosphere of intense anxiety and vulnerability. When a noble must transition from his daytime ceremonial wig to his slightly shorter evening headpiece, his valets position large, folding velvet screens around his chair to ensure that not a single rival courtier or passing servant can catch a fleeting glimpse of his bare, freshly shaved scalp. This acute fear of exposure gives rise to a strange, highly specialized industry of secondary luxury accessories, designed specifically to protect the wearer's transition during these brief moments of transition. Artisans begin manufacturing incredibly elegant, lightweight caps made of thick dark silk or fine velvet embroidered with goldouille, known as the bonnet de nuit, which the noble instantly slips onto his bald head the exact millisecond the heavy periwig is lifted away. These caps are worn not only while sleeping in the freezing, draughty stone bedchambers of the palace, but also during intimate morning breakfasts, with establishing as a secondary family, semi-private tier of etiquette that still completely hides the natural realities of human aging. The absolute erasure of natural hair from public view effectively creates a society of permanent performance, where men look at one another not as flesh and blood individuals, but as walking, highly stylized theatrical masks that reflect the unwavering aesthetic commands of the crown. Jean-Baptiste Colbert's administrative successors monitor this deep psychological dependency with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that a ruling class so thoroughly trapped within the complex mechanics of their own vanity is entirely incapable of organizing independent, localized networks of political resistance against the absolute authority of the central government. The periwig has successfully evolved from a simple solution for a young king's premature psychological cage into an all-French elite, into a permanent, locking the entire French elite into a lifelong cycle of aesthetic submission that defines their every waking and sleeping hour. As the heavy midnight bells echo across the dark, silent expanse of the palace courtyards, thousands of nobles rest their heads on firm-down pillows while wearing their golden-threaded silk caps, their minds entirely locked within the disciplined, unyielding geometry of the sovereign-esque grand design. The total psychological and physical absorption of the aristocracy into this permanent theatre of artificial vanity sets the stage for the final, deeply poignant chapter of the Allongere periwig's golden age, as the long and majestic reign of the Sun King inevitably nears its chronological conclusion. As the early years of the 18th century dawn upon the vast limestone expanses of Versailles, the once vibrant and aggressive energy of the court transitions into a solemn, deeply conservative atmosphere that mirrors the declining health of its aging sovereign, Louis XIV, now a venerable figure who has occupied the throne for over 6 decades, finds himself surrounded by a changing world, yet he remains absolute in his refusal to permit a single modification to the grand visual code he established in his youth. The towering double-peaked architecture of the pure white royal periwig remains entirely unyielding, standing as a permanent, motionless monument of state authority, while the physical body beneath it slowly yields to the natural, inescapable decay of time. Berrurier, now an elderly master craftsman whose own hands tremble with age, spends his mornings in the high-security workshops, utilizing every ounce of his remaining vision to ensure that the king's hair features the exact same vertical height, geometric symmetry, and flawless silver-white brilliance that defined the peak of French global dominance decades earlier. The continuous application of premium starch powders and aromatic iris oils continues without a single day of interruption, creating a familiar, heavy scent that hangs over the quiet royal apartments. Like the thick incense of a permanent historical ritual, courtiers who have spent their entire lives from youth to old age within the palace galleries, like slow-moving, heavily powdered ghosts, move through. The silent candle, their spines rigidly aligned, and their heads carefully balanced under the weight of their cascading curls. The strict aesthetic checkpoints at the iron gates are maintained with an almost religious devotion by the royal guards, who understand that any lapse in the visual uniformity of the court would signal a dangerous decline in the administrative discipline of the state itself. Jean-Baptiste Colbert's administrative successors continue to regulate the specialized powder mills along the Senver-Capite hat absolute bureaucratic rigor, ensuring that even as the national economy faces the immense financial European conflicts, the supply of cosmetic starches to Versailles remains completely starches. This absolute preservation of style functions as a supreme desperate defiance against the laws of nature, a collective effort by an entire civilization to freeze time and maintain an unbroken illusion of eternal strength, youthful vigor, and semi-divine perfection. As the quiet afternoon sun casts long, golden reflections across the unyielding peaks of hair in the Hall of Mirrors, the court of Versailles remains an island of absolute geometric order in a changing universe, a world where the fluid realities of human hold not be entirely universe, have been entirely conquered by the disciplined, eternal design of its sovereign. The final quiet moments of the Sun King's historic reign in the late summer of Mortcham-Meuillam, bringing a magnificent and deeply symbolic periwig to the golden century of the Allongere periwig. As the 76-year-old monarch lies confined to his state bed within the absolute theatre of Versailles, fighting the final stages of a painful illness, the strict etiquette of the royal chamber remains completely unbroken until his very last breath. Even as his physical strength rapidly fades, the king commands his valets to place a perfectly fresh, immaculate mountain of silver curls upon his head every single morning, ensuring that anyone who enters the room sees only the unchanging, towering monument of absolute authority. When Louis XIV finally closes his eyes for the last time on September 1st, Versailles steps forward through the weeping assembly to perform his final sacred duty for the crown, gently lifting the legendary headpiece away to reveal the bare, weathered scalp of the mortal man who had successfully transformed the world into his personal theatre. The passing of the great sovereign sends an immediate revolutionary shockwave through the cultural and economic fabric of France, instantly shattering the rigid visual monoculture that had locked the aristocracy in a permanent ballet of artificial vanity for nearly 50 years. The young successor, Louis XIV, is a mere child of 5, and the governance of the realm shifts to the regent, Philippe d'Orléans, who instantly moves the centre of political life away from the strict, suffocating spaces of Versailles back to the lively, liberated salons of Paris. Released from the intense, watchful gaze of an absolute ruler, the weary nobilitative sigh of physical and psycholectical might psychological relief, eagerly throwing off the heavy 4-pound cages of iron wire and coarse stallion tail hair that had caused them decades of neck strain and headaches. Within a matter of months, the monumental allonge architecture is completely abandoned by the younger generation of courtiers, supplanted by the nimble, lightweight, and natural style of the Regency era, where hair is kept short, softly waved, and tied elegantly at the back with a simple silk ribbon. The specialized powder mills along the Seine River dismantle their high-security silk sieves, returning to the standard production of public flour, while the politically powerful guild of the barbiers perruquiers is forced to rapidly adapt its techniques to create smaller, more delicate personal styles. The magnificent, double-peaked masterpieces that had once commanded absolute psychological submission from the ambassadors of Europe are quietly retired to dark cedarwood storage trunks in the palace basements. Transitioning from active weapons of aggressive statecraft into silent, dusty relics of a bygone era of unparalleled luxury. Yet, the profound historical legacy of this unique chapter remains permanently etched into the legal systems, political structures, and cultural identities of Western civilization, where the grand powdered periwig continues to serve as an enduring symbol of solemn judicial authority and high state dignity for centuries to come, as the heavy iron gates of Versailles are temporarily closed and the thick scent of powders, iris and heat starch finally dissipates from the grand galleries. The world steps forward into a lighter, faster, and more fluid century, leaving behind the magnificent, unyielding geometry of the Sun King's absolute design.